Welcome to another episode of Unresolved Textual Tension. Today, Will and I will be talking about a horror series. It's not really a horror series, but it's pretty
It's horrific considering it was meant for children. And I am William, your other co-host. Well, our third co-host is... She doesn't take this podcast as seriously. She's vacationing in the Mediterranean, you know what I mean? But like me and Katie, we felt like we owe it to you guys, the viewers that we love,
to be here every day. Every day we're not going to give up just to stream for you.
Look, if we need a bad impression of me, I'm sure Katie can provide one. I can also make these kinds of faces a lot if we need to, make popping noises, do the whole kabuki theater. We don't need her. So the series we're doing today is called Remnants. It's by an author called Catherine Applegate. She's more known for another book series she did called Animorphs that was like the early 90s. There was like a TV show on it. So the series we're doing, Remnants, is one she did after that. So the publication of this is a little bit interesting. I'm going to talk first about how like I found it, because it belongs to a kind of genre of books that were like short chapter books, like about this big. They're about 70
novellas.
Yeah, they're about 70 pages long, and it used to be like there were a whole series of them. Garth Nix did a couple that I really love. That was how Animorphs was published. That's how this one was published, and that's why we're actually going to be doing the first 3 today, because they kind of form a bit of an arc, and if you did just one, it would be too short. The other thing that's notable about this series is that they are horrific, and for some reason, they're for like 9 to 14-year-olds.
That would be an understatement. I have to say, honestly, this is some of the best horror. I mean, even visually in movies, this is some of the best horror I've seen or experienced, I guess I should say, in a long while. There are some scenes, I mean, this Applegate doesn't like... Definitely Purple Prose is not a fault of hers. It is succinct. It is very simple, but at the same time super vivid, and there are some scenes that are so nasty.
There's a straightforwardness to it that I feel like should be unsubtle and kind of cliche, but isn't. It is very much like, this is this horrible thing. And also she's great with world building. She comes up with such cool concepts.
Oof.
The way she writes things is really cool. She's really an underrated writer. She kind of disappeared. This series was published back in 2003, and unfortunately at the time of this writing, you cannot get it on ebook. It's not being currently printed, and there's no audiobook. I was looking this morning, and it looks like they're going to be reprinting this spring. So pretty soon she's going to be doing self-publishing it back to her website. The rights reverted to her.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I saw some of the new covers. Those look pretty cool. So, if you're watching this in the future, you should definitely go check them out. I think they're really good. I know me and Katie both really enjoyed them, and they're going to be fun to go through, I think. Okay, so Katie, how would you summarize these books? What's the basic premise?
What happens after the end of the world? It's the apocalypse, but that's only a short part of it, honestly. The first book is about the end of the earth. The second book is about landings, or not landing, someplace else. And the third book is about...
2 words.
Hell!
2 words. Hieronymus Bosch. And yeah, I'm going to probably mess up his pronunciation a lot, because I keep thinking of it as Harmonious Bosch, but it's not. That's like a little teaser, a soupçon for later.
It's really cool. It's because, especially, she's already good at simply describing really, really awful things. I mean, good things too, but honestly, these books are very depressing. There's very few happy moments, and honestly, I would argue none.
That is actually very accurate. It didn't hit me as emotionally this much as when I was a child, because that was my first time reading it, and also I was younger. But like, there's just some dark stuff, and it's unrelenting. Like, there's no people die all the time.
It is so realistic too, in the nastiness of human nature. Even in our protagonist at one point becomes quite petulant in his bitterness, and he also...
It's unglamorous, I find, a lot of times, and unheroic.
Oh yeah. No, this is a depiction of human nature at its worst.
Yeah, it's great. So as Katie said, in the first book, the first book is called The Mayflower Project. And basically, it takes place in 2011 as envisioned in 2003. So like, there's smart cars, and people have like Bluetooth links instead of cell phones, and everybody gets to rename themselves stuff, which is kind of cool. But hilarious.
Not to mention that it's actually frowned upon not to be super involved in technology. There's one character that gets mentioned later on, and just simply because she likes reading older fashioned books and she doesn't want to be plugged in all the time, she's actually derisively looked at. Like, she's People call her a Jane for Jane Austen.
What's funny is in the first book, people will talk derisively about Jane's, and then she's introduced in the second one. So you actually have like a little bit of buildup of thinking this is a dumb thing.
Yeah.
And then she kind of explains what the culture is more about. That I thought was kind of cool. But yes, 2011, and there is a massive asteroid heading towards Earth. And actually, I would like to read the first like 3 paragraphs of the book because I think they give you a sense of the narration style and how it's both kind of witty and laconic at the same time.
It is. I have to say that she's really, really good at finding the right words. You'll notice in this novel, and funnily enough, there's another novel called Tithe by Holly Black.
Oh, do you
And
like that
she
book?
similarly, have you read it?
No, but I know you really like that book.
Oh, I was gonna be like, have you read it recently? Did you read it? And then of course, you know. It is also very simple to the point, but beautifully written, man. There's some gorgeous imagery in it. And this series does the same exact thing, but in a more, even the front covers of these books look depressing. They look like old photos that have been like mutated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so, and kind of grungy. It's actually interesting because at this point when she wrote the series, Catherine Applegate was writing a book a month, and bearing in mind that's like 75-page books, but like that is the style she was on, and so everything to me has a very like we're working through the story. I'm a good writer, but I'm not necessarily sitting here and thinking about how precious the prose are or finding the exact word.
Yeah.
There's an energy to it. Okay, so this is the very start of the first book. Hannibal's Carthaginian army had trapped the Romans under Varro in a place called Carnae. Before the day was done, the Romans would lose 70,000 men. Hannibal would lose less than 6,000. It was to become the very model of total destruction, total victory, annihilation. It was the year 216 BC. On that same day, in that same year, a comet that had for millions of years traveled a long, cold, looping orbit around the sun slammed into a massive asteroid in orbit between Mars and Jupiter. The impact was so powerful it reduced the comet to dust. It had knocked several smaller pieces from the asteroid and nudged them, along with the asteroid itself, from orbit. The asteroid began a slow spiral that would eventually bring it to a fiery death in the sun. Then, in the same year that Abraham Lincoln freed American slaves, the asteroid had a close encounter with Mars. It missed the planet by several 100,000 miles, but the gravity of Mars swung the asteroid into a faster, deeper descent. The asteroid would never reach the sun. It had another stop to make.
What a wonderful ending.
Isn't that great? Like, oh, what's this? Like, obviously the stop is Earth, but like it's a very like kind of clever little writing piece. And that's the basic premise. There is a massive asteroid 70 miles long heading towards Earth.
Is it 70? I thought it was 10 miles long.
I thought it was 70 miles, but as we have realized, I'm bad with names and numbers from this podcast.
It's supposed to be 10 miles long, and the previous, the one that killed the dinosaurs was 750 feet.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. This thing it's massive. There's no way, and that's basically what happens, is that there's an asteroid heading towards Earth, and there's no way to stop it. And so the humans create the Mayflower Project, which is basically an experimental shuttle that they're going to shoot into the stars. But the thing is, everyone knows it's not going to work at all. And we start off with our main character, who is called Jobs, who his original name is Sebastian, but he renamed himself after Stephen Jobs. Which actually, a kind of funny thing is, back in 2003, he wasn't as big a name as he is now. So at the time, in the book, people are like, really, that guy? Not like Bill Gates or one of the big tech guys?
So that's pretty funny, honestly, the insight.
Yeah, because back then, now you're like, oh, he named himself after Steve Jobs. But like back then, it would have been like a nice kind of like little trivia bit. And he's the nerd. He's the smart guy. He's a little awkward with people, but really smart. He can hack everything. And he is our main... So the books alternate between perspectives a lot. Even within like the same chapter, they'll move between several, but he's kind of the main guy.
Yeah, and it's really interesting the way she does switch between perspectives. More or less, what she'll do is in the different chapters, she'll begin a new perspective between several characters that are going to end up on the ship, and even one that doesn't. But there are some places where she actually switches perspectives in the middle of the chapter, but it's very, very apparent who is speaking when, because it's like this omniscient narrator that knows what's happening with everyone, and so no voices get mixed in between so much. Instead, it's more like you're switching scenes very easily because of the simple narration. So she does a really great job of switching without all the technicalities of having to switch perspectives, by just keeping it like an all-knowing kind of narrator.
A lot of the characters have really distinct voices that like they'll talk
That
about
too.
things differently. Violet, the one who's kind of Jane Austen-y that we'll talk about later, she uses more formal language in her narration. And Mo Steele, who is Jobs' best friend and is basically his like antithesis. He's like a really dumb thrill jock. He wants all of the excitement
He's
stuff.
not dumb. He actually has a calculator for a
Yes, but we're
brain.
in her perspective, and we can feel that like he's kind of checked out of everything that isn't adrenaline, and him and you can see that in he also tends to use a lot more future slang than any of the other characters, and then like a little Spanish slang too. And him and Jobs have the like most wholesome friendship in the world because they both really respect each other and they work really good as a team. Jobs is the brain, Mo is the muscle. It's kind of nice even when things go to complete shit in like later parts of the book and series that the two of them stay like working together well.
That was actually my favorite aspect of the entire novel. Like, I mean, not really. I like the horror aspect, but that was the one shining gem of purity in comparison to all of the nastiness of human nature that's displayed in all the other characters.
I was gonna say that, yeah, because so much of the rest of the characters are really flawed humans with whose ugliness shines through because they're in a desperate situation. But they too stay like it's sweet. I like it. And what happens is that Jobs and Mo's fathers or parents are NASA employees, and so Jobs finds out. I forget how because Maria's not here, so I can't. We're not gonna remember that many details.
I'm
Okay,
here.
all right.
I'm here. I remember. Good lord.
Okay, all right. Try to do some faces and like motions while you're doing it.
Okay. Well, let me get into character. It opens up actually with Jobs in a or Jobs in a self-navigated car, which he'd never been in before. In fact, actually, I want to make the side note. Both Will and I agree. Jobs is 14. And most of the other children are 14, and they do not act like they're 14. They act like they're 17.
This
16.
is like a YA thing, which is when you're a teenager, you think you're like a person, and then as you get older, you realize like, oh, not really. Teenagers are still very much kids. I even feel like 20-year-olds are still very much kids. But like, it makes no sense that Jobs is 14. I mentally aged everyone up by about 3 to 4 years in my head, and like him at 18, 17 or 18 makes so much more sense.
It makes more sense with his maturity too, and with everyone's like not I wouldn't say necessarily maturity, but there is a maturity to him and Mo Steele, and honestly a lot of them that are in that age group that just doesn't make any sense. Even the 8-year-old is really confusingly like I don't know with it, even though we don't.
And I mean, people age at different rates and mature at different rates, but yeah, no, it's easier if you just age them up in your head.
We start out with Jobs in a car, and he's gonna listen to music, but then he forgot to essentially get rid of the pop-up. He didn't activate his pop-up blocker. And a news report came up of an asteroid potentially hitting the Earth, and then he went to fact check it, and then he like put 2 and 2 together. Oh, my parents have been really freaked out these past 2 weeks. Oh, there's this article, and I just fact checked it. And he immediately calls Mo Steele to let him know. Mo Steele already knows. He's known for a hot second. He's like going down this intense ramp that's probably illegal to use. And he's like skating down it, and he's like, yeah, Migo, I already knew this.
Specifically, he keeps talking to Jobs, but he's kind of irritated that Jobs is talking to him during the best moment of his life. He's like,
yes.
You're kind of ruining this. Again, they have such a wholesome friendship, but like, it's also one of the things I'm going to talk about that I find interesting is that a lot of times it's difficult to write characters reacting to really traumatic and crazy things, especially when you don't have a lot of lead up time to settle into the character. Because there's this thing in fiction where like you and the character need to align, and then once you're aligned, when the character feels something, you'll feel it. But what happens is too early, if the character starts feeling something you don't feel, the two of you will unalign and you just kind of disconnect from the character and what's happening. And what's interesting about this book is that it is actually really effective at keeping you aligned with the characters, even with like very little. Again, the first book is only like 70 pages, and like you're still there.
I don't know how she actually. I would have to reread the beginning again. It's because when anytime I start a book, it like erases from my mind the first like 10 pages for some reason, the details of it. But she does a really like just instantly. I was interested. Like I wasn't even bored like I have been with some of our other YA novels, where it's like a slow beginning or something. It jumps into the scene, and despite it even jumping into the scene, you get a lot of like character from him just by like details that he is making note of. It really works.
And she does this for like 6 characters in this book. It's really impressive. I think one of the things she does, and this is a greater arc thing, and this leads into the next part, is that Jobs has a crush on this girl called Cordelia, and they kissed at the summer dance or whatever dance or something like that, and they haven't talked since. And so even though he realizes the world is going to end, he's actually still throughout the book really kind of perseverating on this memory and how he feels about Cordelia. And even later on, he realizes like, I'm perseverating on this a weird amount because of what's going on right now. I really should not even be thinking about it. But it helps tie you to the character because it's such a relatable thing to have a crush and not quite be sure what's going on. And it also gives him more human stakes for what he's doing in that moment. And towards the end of the book, you're like, yeah, there is this disconnect between like the world is ending and he knows he should be feeling more crazed about it, but like his brain is, as a safety measure, kind of trying to focus on this more mundane thing. And I think that's one of the ways she does it.
As you were saying that, it clicked for me that maybe part of the way she humanizes them so much is that they question themselves so often, and they all of them have major
Mm-hmm.
flaws and small flaws, and very few interactions don't play upon a flaw of some sort, or a lack of ability. And so they don't feel OP at all. So in doing that, I think she instantly humanizes and makes us feel like them, because since they are helpless, just like we would probably be in that situation. And also each age group, and each character, their concerns and focuses, I feel like she made a graph and she said this person likes this person likes this, and then like showed like essentially like a personality chart, like, you know, likes, dislikes, all that stuff, and she kept to it. But she, instead of like some of our other books that we've shown where it's almost like hitting you over the head with it, or even worse, purple prosing it, and you have like it just going around and around, she just has them pursue those goals that make sense for their
It's
characters.
funny because I don't actually forget people's names in these books, and I don't know if it's because I read them at such a young age, or it's just because she actually builds pretty recognizable characters. But basically, the book follows a few of them, and basically, there's a similar arc where she'll introduce a character to figure out what's happening, and then later we'll come back to them later in the book. The basic overall thing of what's happening, because Jobs talks to his parents, and his parents treat him as like they know he's smart, is that an asteroid is heading towards the Earth. It can't be stopped. This is not Armageddon. We're not going to send Bruce Willis and a guy he has homoerotic tension with, and they treat his daughter as property between the two of them and blow up the asteroid. That's not happening here. No Michael
With
Bay.
cowboy
With
hats.
cowboy hats.
It's funny, it's because they bring it up in the book and like make fun of it.
Yeah, because they're like, no, we can't blow it up. A tiny part of it is just going to hit us and destroy us anyway. Like, there's no stopping this. Our one chance is that we're going to renovate the space shuttle, add in a bunch of prototype technology, and shoot it out into the stars with everyone in hibernation. But every character makes the point that like, this is a wild shot. Nobody actually really thinks this is going to work. And also, and this is such a great thing and it says so much about the series, they're not sending like Earth's best and brightest. They're not like, okay, how are we going to repopulate a world? It's literally like, who do we need to send? Because either A, they're important, B, they're high up in NASA or the government, or C, they have blackmail material on us and we want us to shut down them releasing the information of the asteroid coming, and we can get them to shut up by putting them on the shuttle.
Yeah, and the reason that matters is because otherwise there would have been a flood of people. So people were like, oh, I have this information. If you don't let me on, then I'll tell others, and then they'll swamp you, which ends up actually happening anyway, which is awesome.
Here in 2022, I actually find it hard to believe that the majority of people wouldn't just go fake news about it, considering
Yeah.
how easy it is for
Yeah.
people nowadays to discount very real calamities that are happening. And so one of the other characters that we meet is Two-Face. She's literally the number 2 and face. And her father is a journalist who figured out that this is happening, and that's how they're getting on board. They're only taking intact families, which is kind of interesting and will lead to more dynamics in later books. And the thing about Two-Face is that one half of her face is super pretty, and the other half is like all scars from a fire she was in. But we don't know how it started.
I wonder what it is.
Yes, and if you're thinking this is a lot like that Batman villain, yes, like down to the name. But she's a great character. I like her because she is clever and she is very kind of cold in a lot of ways.
She's empathetic, actually, but she acts on logic.
Yeah, and she understands that, like, okay, well, later on, that like there is an aspect to her that's very not self-centered, but she's aware that she could be an outcast in a group and the scapegoat, and she really does not want that to happen. So she actually is a little bit smarter about politics than like Jobs, who's all about technical problems. And we only meet her a little bit in this book. She has that opening chapter, and then she interacts with Jobs a little bit later, but she's a big part of the books after that. Another big character we meet is called Billy. And he's Billy Weir, but everyone calls him Billy Weird. And he is a Chechen orphan who was raised in Texas. And the thing about Billy that's really interesting is that he has like psychic foreshadowing abilities. He can see into the future. He talks about seeing things on a far
I
off
was not expecting that.
strange world and like sleeping, and like he sees things. He sees Mo, he sees Jobs in the future. And I'll explain my theory about this later that I think is really interesting. But like
It is. He's got a great
I'm
theory.
not sure if it makes sense, but I like it. And so, like, his father comes and tells him, like, look, we're going to get on this ship and try to get out of here. And Billy inside is like, yeah, I know. But he's also kind of disconnected from everything a little bit. And so he's like a little above it all in terms, he's like his distanced in terms of the narration.
He's like Bran in the TV
Yes.
series Game of Thrones when he becomes
Three-Eyed
the
Raven.
yeah, Three-Eyed Raven, there we go. He loses like his emotions but is like weirdly sort of sage-like, and that's Billy.
He doesn't really do much in the first book. We'll talk in a minute about later what he does.
Once Jobs figures this all out and he's still thinking about Cordelia, he decides to get Mo Steel and run over to her house in old-fashioned notion of climbing the vines and getting into her room.
Well, his plan is that he's gonna tell her and then blackmail NASA to try to get her on the ship.
Yes.
And even the whole time he's doing
Exactly.
this, he's like, "Why am I trying to save one person out of a billion?" And that permeates this whole first book, is this feeling of like everything is gonna be gone. There is gonna be nothing left. But like again, it's a very relatable goal to try to save the girl you like.
And not only that, it's like it's his first crush. So they had a really tender moment. He listened to her and she appreciated that. And so he one time towards the end, he thinks to himself, what could have been with her? Like he actually is like full on like, could it have been my soulmate type of thing, where like I live and we love each other and we have a very strong relationship type of thing, which is really intense for a 14-year-old, but whatever. I mean, like little girls do that all the time, so why can't little boys?
Well, one thing is that Jobs, as technical minded as he is, has a very poetic side. The book talks about it, is kind of there, and that he is sort of like a romantic under it all, and he likes those kind of big ideas. And he's also, I think, at that point just undergoing so much emotional, like, what could the whole world have been like if it continued to keep going? So he goes into her room and he's gonna find her, but she's not there.
No, he actually gets caught by the Secret Service, whatever's the FBI, CIA. I don't know what's going on, but there's like some secretive force that collects him, and he's told that Cordelia isn't there, that she's someplace else, and we don't get any more of her until the very end. And then once that happens, we get how each of the other characters start preparing for the trip, the losses that they'll have. Like, for example, Job's mother at one point, when they
oh god, this was so sad.
I know, I died. It really killed me. But anyway, when they come to collect Jobs' family, the mom is like, we have to bring the cats, and they're like, no, you can't, we're not bringing the cats. And she's like, but the poor dears, I'll leave food out for them. And it's just like, and she's crying, and it's just so depressing.
They're like, we'll have someone to come take care of them. And it's like, yeah, for the day before they die. Like, the asteroid's going to hit in 48 hours. There's no time. And again,
I would not have left without my fucking cat. I swear to God.
That's what I was thinking.
If I didn't go on the ship, so be it. I'm going to stay there and die with my cat. I swear to God. Mochi is too good of a creature. Cat laying right here.
Like, oh, you're not leaving that behind.
Can you? No, not even remotely. Like,
look at that Jabba the Hutt face. And there's a point where one of the FBI guys is like going into Jobs' computer, and he mentions that like, oh, my son is also like a techie. And there's just like a moment where Jobs thinks of asking him more about his son, and he's like, they're all gonna be dead. Like, how is this guy still doing his job when the world's going to end? None of it matters. There is such a like existential dread that permeates almost all of the book, and is shown in just like small ways. Like, no one really sits and thinks about it for an hour, and it's not purple, but it's there. It's ever present in the air.
For example, towards the end, when they're getting loaded up onto the shuttle, there's a NASA employee or engineer or whatever, and he's drunk. And, they're about to die, so that makes sense. And he's just, like, super inebriated, telling them, like, to get onto the shuttle. And it's a very half-assed shuttle. It's described as
You can see
pathetic.
it was welded together out of different parts. There's new and old. There's also this great moment where another of the NASA employees is like really efficient and cheerful, and Jobs is surprised. And then she's like, "Okay, go on to the shuttle this way. The Lord provides. The Lord saves. We should all know His salvation." And you're like, "Oh shit, that's such a random." And she just says it so flatly.
They're still, even as they're boarding the ship, welding important things. So, you know, it's like, it is not even remotely what you see in movies where they're like, yes, we have these high-tech berths in which you will hibernate and all these things. No, not even remotely. It is like,
Later on in the second book, they make a point of like they don't even know how this thing was supposed to land. And kind of what I think, though it's never stated, is that like the reason behind it is that this was really just a mission to make people at home early. Nobody designing the mission actually thought they would even be able to land this ship. So it was literally just a motion to send it out into the universe, not an actual plan.
I think it was more like a last-ditch effort just to send off literally any evidence of human existence. It's because they also loaded up like thumb drives or whatever their version of it is, of like art and music and stuff like that. So I think it was just a time capsule. And even if they died in there, at least it's human. You know what I mean? That's what I'm picturing.
And so all the families and all the characters, Jobs, Billy, Mo Steel. He's called Mo Steel, by the way, because he changed his name to Mo Steel, which is either stands for Man of Steel or More Steel, and he can't remember which is just a...
I like More Steel better.
I like
honestly.
that too as well. He keeps getting into accidents and having to replace his bones with titanium because he's such a like a gland junkie, I think he calls it at one point, like the adrenal gland.
Yes, he squeezes the A gland, which makes me feel really, really uncomfortable.
That was a real children's book. Billy, Two-Face, Mo Steel, Jobs, and this is where we're then introduced to Iago, who is
Iago.
He is the president's son, and he is probably the most cartoonish character in the books in that he's just like a sociopath. And like he doesn't break the books because he does interesting things for the other characters, and the author does imbue him with a certain amount of realism. But like he's just such a terrible guy. He's such a narcissist. His mother actually won points in a poll because everybody felt more sympathetic to her after he said he wanted to be feared when he grew up. Like he's such a dick.
And he also has yellow cat eyes and green hair. It's because they like DNA spliced him. It's because they're super rich.
It's hilarious though, because in his head he thinks he's super cool and he knows what's going on, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna need to start gaining control of the group when we land. So I'm gonna go up to Two-Face. She'll be easy to win over. I'm gonna act all cool around her. And goes over and he thinks he's being really cool, but actually he's just being an enormous dick.
A complete dork. He is a dork.
And it's from his viewpoint too, which is what's hilarious. And Two-Face is like, no, I don't like you. Go away. And then he tries to grab her, and then Mo Steel and Jobs come in and help her out. And then like they push him back, and he goes to the security,
his bodyguards.
He's like, they attacked me. Did you see? And they're like both so over it. They're just standing with coffee cups in the back, being like, whatever, we're all gonna die in 2 days. We don't give a shit.
Not just that, but they obviously don't give two flying Fs about him. So yeah, and then they end up just like at one point where they're getting closer to the time of annihilation, a lot of people flee and end up leaving their stations, and it's just like understood it's because they're going to go back with their families and stuff.
Because the thing is, when everything is going to end, what actually matters? You're it's funny, there was a recent Marvel series, Loki, which was not that good, but one of the things it had is that like
I've heard the exact opposite. I've heard that out of all the miniseries, that's one of the better ones.
But I didn't actually think it was that good. I just thought it was fun because Loki's in it.
I don't think any of the Marvel shows are good. Almost, there's very few.
But like one of the things there is that if they're trying to stop diverging timelines, and if something happens right before a big catastrophe for everyone dies, there's no alternate timelines. You can't diverge it because everyone's going to die. And in this case, it's like, yeah, there's no future. Why not go and be with your children and your wife and your husband for like the last,
or your cats?
Yeah. And so that's kind of in the next part, which is, well, actually, no, before that, Jobs has a run-in with Billy when they're both going to the bathroom at night. And Billy is just like in a weird trance, and Jobs thinks he's sleepwalking, but he's not. And he goes, I see you. I see you in the future when we get there. And Jobs is like, what the hell are you talking about? But that actually ends up having a lot of impact later in the second and third book, that Billy tells him this right here.
And also Jobs brings it back, or Jobs, whatever. He brings it back up later to Billy, which I thought, like, it's so annoying when details from characters that are actually important, in particular, but also some unimportant ones, when they're just like never
Yeah.
referenced or thought back to again, because then it seems like the buildup is like useless. So it's not as if Billy says this and then it's just like, ooh, for the audience's sake, and that's it. No, it's actually a plot device, in a good way, and it's utilized throughout the series in the next
Yeah.
book.
And then the next day, a big thing happens.
Okay, so when this happened, I was like, "Ooh, this series is
And what's
metal."
hilarious is like I hadn't, because again I just remembered the series from having read it. I didn't realize you didn't realize it was as casual with death and grim dark stuff as it is. Because yeah, this is the first moment where you're like, oh shit.
Oh yeah, no, Applegate does not pull punches whatsoever. Like, I can't wait to talk about the worm scene. Cordelia is, in a weird way, you almost can see the image. She's recording because she's a photographer and she's really good at what she does. She's recording her very wealthy cousin's wedding, which is in San Fran, and it's right outside the Golden Gate Bridge. They're on a boat, I think, and so she's taking pictures from a different location. She has got like a high tech camera, and her family is streaming that camera view and they're watching, and she's being playful. It's because she thinks her cousin is like kind of full of herself and stuff, and she's just like, okay, I'll focus on them. It's because she was just like kind of doing silly stuff, and so she focuses, but then she sees the asteroid, or a part of it at least. And so a piece of the asteroid had broken off and it falls, and she says it's like so fast, and it hits into the water, I believe. And I mean, the city, like the buildings are instantly
I
annihilated.
bookmarked this part to quote it just because it's such a good example of, even when her writing is very straightforward, there is a detail to it that really ties you in and makes you realize what's going on.
The boat that her cousin was on pretty much just gets thrown off into the bridge, and she talks out loud and she's like, oh, all those poor people. But then the shock hits her and she gets flown backwards and impaled by some type of pole or wooden thing. And the camera's just on her, like choking on her
And
last
it's
breath.
live streaming.
And that's,
to everyone.
yes, it's because it was a big wedding. And so everyone just, that's how they know. So what an opening.
So they call the part that's hitting the bay the pebble. The immediate shockwave flattened every building in Alameda and Oakland. Skyscrapers were simply knocked over like a kid's pile of blocks. Frame houses collapsed. Cars were tossed around like leaves in the wind. The water of the bay surged in, sucking the USS Reagan into the bay, a swirling bath toy. Then all at once the water blew back. The USS Reagan was picked up and thrown into and through the Golden Gate Bridge. The rust-red bridge wrapped bodily around the flying ship. The bridge supports ripped from the shores. Cables snapped like bullwhips. The shockwave reached San Francisco itself. The downtown area pancaked. Areas that were landfill simply melted away. Quicksand. Entire square miles of the city sank down into the water. 1 million dead in less than 5 seconds. Cordelia said, "Oh my God, all those people." It was all she had time to say before the shockwave ripped apart the mansion on Twin Peaks.
Yes.
And like that's how she writes. It's like it's so impactful and yet like not purple. It's great. I really love it.
It's because she's, I think, you know what, there's two things going on here now that you've read that out loud. One, she doesn't try to create really unique images in your brain. Instead, she makes a direct comparison to other things that you know about in order to get the point across quicker. And two, she uses a lot of similes. And I just noticed, and the similes in this case work way better than some type of metaphor or other like long piece of like of a device. It's because it instantly gives you that image, but then it moves on.
No, you're totally right. That's one of the things I noticed here is there's so many small, great descriptions that are very mundane, but they fit really well. So like the water of the bay surged in, the USS Reagan, which is an aircraft carrier, a swirling bath toy, the rust-red bridge wrapped bodily around the flying ship, the bridge supports snapped like bullwhips. Yeah, that's one also I picked up on. That's one of the ways she writes that's just, it's very immediate, and it helps her get away, again, I think, with some of the more horror aspects because they don't feel pretentious. They just feel horrific and straightforward, and the ideas behind them shine through. And so, you know, Jobs is in kind of shock about this, and the whole world is in shock because now they know that this rumor of the asteroid was not fake news. It was real. They're all going to die. And people start to flood towards the shuttle, the Mayflower.
In fact, when they are trying to take off in the shuttle, there's heavy fire from people trying to surge into the area and all the security that is trying to keep people back. Which we can we do a shout out to the security guards and stuff?
Well, one specific security guard who's going to become a very pivotal character. Do you want to describe her? Because I loved her to no end.
I don't remember her last name, but Tamara. She's a Marine, and she becomes the I did not expect the type of character she was going to become. And that is so amazing that she was able to do, like, Applegate was able to do this. But Tamara is pregnant, 6 weeks pregnant. And the father of a child is, elsewhere doing his job. And she's concerned, but she's also made peace with the fact that her daughter, that's what she thought she was going to have, that her daughter was going to die with her. And she did make a peace.
She's a Marine to her core, Semper Fi. She talks about how she loves being a Marine. One of the guys on her platoon is like, why are we doing this? Like, we're all going to die. And she's like, oh, I didn't know. Like, did they not, on Iwo Jima, did they think they were all going to get out of there alive? It doesn't matter.
That's a great point.
What's going to happen? We're Marines. We hold the line. And she's in charge of the security cordon. And she's such a tough character, and it's cool. And one of the people on the Mayflower Project comes up to her late at night when she's like smoking, and she's like, I'm a baby doctor. I don't know what they're called. OBGYN?
Yeah, it's fine.
And this woman, Connie Huerta, I can remember names when Maria isn't around. Her power. That's what's happening. She usually suctions my memory from me. And now my power is returning to me now that she isn't here.
Yes. Look at that.
She goes, I can tell that you're pregnant. How many months is it? And Tamara tells her, like, I don't know, it's like 3 or something. And Connie's like, look, why don't you take my place on the ship? I don't want to be here. I don't love my husband. There's another man that I would prefer to die with. And at that point, Tamara is actually like a little tempted, but she's like, no, I belong to the Marines. I'm not going to let you go. You got to stay on board. I'm going to hold the line. And that's like one of the moments that you realize like how serious she is about all of this. She is hardcore. And that's going to be interesting with what happens later in the second book and third book, because she'll be around and you'll see how.
There are also two other characters that are brought in, although one is super inconsequential. There's a guy named Mark who's in his 20s and his younger brother who's, I don't know, young, 14, named Decaf. And Decaf is really intelligent, and so is Mark. But Decaf is more like, youthful, a little bit more wild. And Mark is super like a sociopath right now.
I actually like their relationship because there is an element of abuse between the two, but there is still the sense that they're brothers. Like, he had to take care of Decaf from a very young age once the parents were dead. And so there is sort of a need between the two of them. And I actually really liked how that plays out.
Simultaneously, though, Mark is bitter about the fact that he lost out on his childhood. Mm-hmm. Mark is very, like, demeaning to Decaf a little
As much
bit.
As he loves him, he also kind of thinks he's a little dumb and emotionally weak, which Decaf isn't dumb, but he is a little emotionally all over the place.
But Decaf also picks up on this because we get his perspective, and he knows his brother feels that way, but he's fine with it.
He basically doesn't become a character till like book 4 or 5. Like, we're not even going to mention him after this book because he's there, but he's not important. But some stuff does, I think, happen with him that's kind of interesting, but that's later.
Mark makes it a point because they're not a complete family, so they can't get onto the shuttle. But Mark figures out, because he's crazy smart, that the shuttle's happening, all that stuff. And so he intends to take his father's gun and kill his way onto the ship for him and his brother, which works in a weird way. I thought he was gonna, because spoiler, Mark dies. Mark gets shot not by accident.
So basically what happens is that the outside world is mobbing the spaceship. All of the passengers, again, there's 80 of them. They're getting on the ship one by one. They get into the pods. This is all told through Job's perspective. They go into the pods. I actually liked the way that the pods were described, in that like they're super high tech against like a ship that isn't, because it really is like our space shuttle now, but like with prototype hibernation pods in them.
I really liked the description of the births as well, because of the unpredictability of what's going on. They were not able to get a training seminar, which they were supposed to, on how to get into the births and such. And so there's actually a recording of a general, and they're like, yeah, sorry guys, this really sucks, but you're going to have to do this on your own without actually really understanding. So follow my narration. And they have to shove a tube down their own throat for like life support and put this like thing on their face that feels super suffocating.
It's one of the things, it's like a small thing, but I hate when hibernation pods in sci-fi are just like, you go in the pod, time freezes. I like that this one is very much like, no, they're shutting down your entire system. They're stopping your cells from dividing. You're essentially dying in a way. Your life is halting in death, and then will be reawoken later. And then when they wake up in the second book, I really like how that is described. But as Jobs is doing this and he's beginning to fall asleep, he sees that one of the space suits is moving. It's like there's someone in there. And Tamara is going to be the last one out of the ship. And they had to take off all of a sudden because somebody breached the perimeter. Basically, what happens is that she gets shot by Mark, who was in the spaceship. He was in the spacesuit. He shoots her. She shoots him because she's a bamf. The whole ship goes up into space as the whole time that's happening. Jobs has to figure out how to get out of his berth. Decaf accidentally shoots one of, or not accidentally, he kind of accidentally, but probably also kind of on purpose, shoots one of the other pilots, and Jobs and the other remaining pilot, the one left, they're able to stop him. But Tamara is out of it. She's got a bullet hole in her shoulder. She's unconscious. They put her in one of the hibernation berths. But they're like, hey, this is not going to work. They also don't know she's pregnant, which is going to be interesting.
Oh, when he says interesting, he means
Interessement.
Legendary. Interesting.
Epic. But the other space astronaut is like, the other pilot is like, it doesn't actually matter. The thing got shot that opens up the sail wing, the solar sails. So like, we can't go anywhere. There's a very specific time window where we need to accelerate around the Earth to get to the sun to accelerate out, which is, actually that's like a tenth of a millionth off of a percent can screw up almost any space travel because the distances are so vast. And he's like, I can't go out there. My hand got shot to open it manually. And like, you can't do it, kid. And Jobs is like, but I know who can.
Mo Steel. Mo Steel. We need Mo Steel.
And Mo Steel is just so happy to like, he's like, we're doing a spacewalk out into space. They're like, this is awesome. This is like what I live for.
He's like, dude, you're a real bro. And so they go out, and it's of course a hardship and everything. And as they're going out there and they're trying to crank open the sails, they actually see the asteroid hit Earth. And it is so traumatizing.
It's that description I gave of San Francisco Bay, but for like a page and a half of just describing the utter destruction. 3 chunks of the Earth fly up when it hits the moon.
It seems so realistic too. It's because there's these little details that she throws out there, like how the asteroid seems like it's moving really slow until all of a sudden it's not, as they see the comparison between the Earth and its movement, and all of a sudden it's instant. It's like phew! Mm-hmm. And it just like, and then she hypothesizes, or she's creating the image of all the liquid on the Earth being vaporized and all this stuff. So you're getting like this godlike perspective, which allows you to feel the full impact of it. And then of course you get Mo Steel and Jobs. Like,
there actually almost is no, it's like that happens and then there's another page and the book ends, because like they just see it it really is, it's so horrific. This book, again, I don't know how they were like, this is good for 14-year-olds. And mind you, I read it when I was young and I enjoyed it, but like, geez.
Even more horrific and really stood out for me is that Jobs is insightful enough that he notices when they get back on the ship that the astronaut, he had to leave his wife and kids behind. And so he has the gun that Decaf had. And he thinks to himself, maybe I should say something to him before I go in. But he decides not to. And as he's going asleep in the berth, he hears the gunshot. And then we know that the pilot has committed suicide. And it's just like this weird understanding from Jobs that gives it this really hefty, sad, almost like empathetic moment where you're like, of course that makes sense. But at the same time, it's such a tragedy. And also, like, he had a birth. He could have lived, but he chose not to.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It gave me chills because it's just such a moment. Again, the moments of despair permeate the book in an unpretentious way. And I think that's one of the reasons the atmosphere is so good. And then the book ends with a whammer of a line. Let me see if I can find it. Two-Face slept, her birth between those of her parents. Iago slept, as alone now as ever. Decaf slept, calm at last. Billy Ware lay unmoving, his body paralyzed. He could not hear, could not see, could not move. The hibernation equipment slowed every process, stopped every activity. But Billy Ware did not sleep. His brain did not shut down. The Mayflower fell toward the sun, accelerating all the while, faster and faster, yet still painfully, pitifully slow in the distances of space. It would fall toward the sun for years, and slowly come around the sun for years, and gain still more speed, and race away from the sun, and past the shattered remains of dark Earth for years stretching into decades. Centuries. And still, Billy Ware would not sleep.
That was the best part. Like, that was chilling. And all I could think about, and of course that's where we begin in the next book, where you learn that poor Billy has been stuck in his own mind for
Paul
500
DeRay thought it was
years.
tough living, dying on that tree for 7 years. Billy has gone mad, insane, and mad again. He has remembered everything. He has remembered things he didn't think he could remember as an orphan. He thinks he's beginning to remember what
Oh,
other passengers thought, and then he's like, maybe I'm just imagining what their memories are, but it doesn't matter. I'm sane and insane, and time slows down. That is like such a
there's this one.
major existential fear of mine that and I'm like,
Oh,
oh
I
my god,
know.
it didn't hit me as hard this time because I'm an adult, but like especially when I was a kid, I was like, Jesus.
There's this one part where they meant he describes some of his memories. I'm going to look it up because it's worth it.
He raved silently, hallucinated. He regained his sanity and lost it, and regained it as the years passed, as the decades passed, as the very definition of madness became irrelevant. And all of it over again and again. Time was nothing, leaping by in years and decades, crawling past so slowly that each millisecond might be a century.
And this really made it relatable in a way that almost nothing else is. The reason I say that is because it's mentioning things that every one of us must experience, especially in America. He remembered his adoptive parents, their comfortable Texas home, school, church, McDonald's, the backyard pool, his room. He remembered every song he had ever heard, every TV show, every friend, acquaintance, enemy, every passing face in the mall. He remembered the wallpaper, the fly specks on it, everything. Like, I think about when I'm trying to go to sleep and how I, rehash different scenarios and stuff, and then also memories. And thinking back on those really vivid thoughts are exactly like this. And I can only imagine Billy trying to comfort himself with the familiar, only to remember that he's only thinking about it. And no matter how vivid it is, he's going to have to either restart thinking about it at some point, or he's going to have to
Oh
start
yeah.
imagining in some other way. So he has limited resources,
Yeah, there is a finite amount of sensory information
knowledge.
that he can replay over 500 years.
And so, of course, he's going to go mad. It's because imagine, I mean, just the boredom. Like that in and of itself is maddening.
I've read accounts of people in solitary confinement, and like
Yeah.
after 30 days, they are just major. It is entirely a form of torture. One of the people, he was talking about how like he would think of things that had happened and then replay them in entirely different ways, and it became like it was real. And I'm someone who has a very loose grasp on reality. Thank you, mental illness. And so for me, especially, it was just like that.
Shout out mental illness.
Mental illness
Shout out mental illness.
awareness month, I think we're in. I just felt it, and it's so horrific. And so my theory that I told Katie, and I just kind of like this, it's not backed up or anything, but is not that he was prescient from the beginning, right? In the first book, he wasn't prescient of things to come. I like to think of that in this time, he became, in these 500 years,
Yes.
he almost became unmoored from time. And so what he's feeling in the
Yes.
first book is actually his mind in this midpoint reaching out into the past.
Yes.
And that I kind of think is a really interesting idea of just time
I
itself.
totally
breaking.
agree with that. Almost like almost like Bran.
Yeah.
And yeah, like being able to touch the past in a weird way.
Yeah, and because weird things happened on this trip, and the book says it's because they got hit by like a lot of radiation. Some things are going to happen with survivors. It's a little like, it's not hard sci-fi, but I love it because it's also horrific. And so now we're properly into book two. Book two starts with Billy having these memories of things happening, and then he sees suffering and then something new happens. And then we switch over to Jobs, and Jobs is waking up out of hibernation. And it's kind of interesting because his body is just like, it's not like he snaps. It's not like, in the first Halo, the Master Chief wakes up from hibernation and 3 seconds later he's killing a bunch of Covenant. Like, that's how hibernation is usually treated in sci-fi. Here he wakes up, he can't think, he blinks, and then goes to sleep for a day. And then when he does, it's like he's like dried paper. He's desiccated. He can't think clearly.
He forgets who he is even for a moment, and has to like pair together memories. And he keeps falling asleep, and so does everyone else. Everyone keeps falling asleep for like a day after they are even able to get out of their berth.
Eventually, Two-Face comes over to see him. She remembers him, but not quite. And they both go up into the top of the shuttle. And he's kind of weirded out because the shuttle is vertical right now. And it shouldn't be. It should be horizontal because it takes off vertically, but it lands horizontally. So he's like, okay, how did we land? That's odd. And he goes up, and Mo Steele is already there because, of course, he is. And he's like, guys, you got to look at this. And outside the ship.
Oh, it's so good, guys.
You want to describe it?
So it's a dichotomy. It's a straight split down the middle, and on one side is a Monet. It's swaths of color and patches of detail, and on the other side is this hard, cold charcoal type shadowing of
It's all in black and white.
canyons.
And when she says Monet, by the way, she's not speaking metaphorically. It is actually fuzzy and like there are brushstrokes in it. And so they're like, this cannot be a normal environment. What is going on here? Are we all dead? And like one of the characters is like, we wouldn't be thirsty if we were dead. Like, this is just a weird situation. So they're like, okay, we got to wake everybody up. And Jobs is like, this makes no sense. We would have crashed. Like, this is the point too where you realize there's like no landing gear on the ship. There's really no shot that this ever. So they're like, how did this happen? How did we land up? So they go down and they're gonna wake everyone else up. And what they find is that out of the 80 people,
Cheese.
a bunch of them are dead. His father is mold.
Oh God! Wait, let me find the description. It was so jarring. It was so
because what happened is they've all been bombarded by radiation. This was an experimental hibernation pod to begin with, and also they talk about micrometeorites hitting through the armor at certain points and actually just killing people.
He sat up he sat up carefully, cautiously. He stared at the hibernation berth next to his own, his dad's berth. The plexiglass was dark. The dull yellow light showed something fibrous, as if the berth had been filled with. Jobs reeled. His stomach heaved and nothing to expel. A weird moan came out of his dry throat. The berth was filled with what only could be fungus of some sort. Generations of it, filling the berth like bread mold. That's how it looked, green and black, no shape visible within. Nothing human, just a 6-foot box filled with decay. His father has been reduced to nothing but atoms, and
his body was fed upon by bacteria until it was it's a closed ecosystem of the only bacteria. All it could feed on was his body over and over. And then his mom is just a skeleton, which is like comparatively much easier.
In fact, it's described that her teeth, he can see her skeleton, and the crowns that she had gold are in the back of her throat, of her skeleton's throat.
Yeah, it's so great. So a bunch of the parents have died. All of the characters we described in the first book, they're alive. Jobs' parents are dead. Mosteel's dad is dead. Two-Face's mom is dead. And then what they try to wake up Billy, but they can't. Jobs goes to him and he's like, you were right, Billy. You saw me. We're here now. And Billy just doesn't react. Like Two-Face sees if his irises are responding to the light, and they are, but he's just non-reactive.
Billy has been in this state of suffering for so long that when people come in and out of his vision and when people speak to him, it's so fast that he doesn't understand
He has slowed down over the 500-year period, and that makes sense because there would be no stimulus. Everything's slowed down. So at this point, he's catatonic, essentially, to them. They wake up a lot of people. A lot of them are dead. A lot of them are mold or cheese. They come up with like funny names for them.
Tamara is in the berth, and Jobs and somebody else, I think Mosteel, open up the berth, and she's there. But so is a baby that seems like it should be 2 years old, but it looks like a baby the size of a 2-year-old. It's described that the umbilical cord and almost like the amniotic sac have merged and adhered to both the baby and Tamara.
I thought it as like a Resident Evil one or like a Bloodborne kind of like weird, that's like
membrane-y kind of thing. Yeah, that's exactly what I was picturing. And so she's in there. And first you have to ask yourself, if their cells stopped, how did the baby get born? And everyone's wondering that as well.
And where did the mass come from? Like of a baby, you know what I mean? Like the simple everyone's like, how did it
grow?
And then the baby turns to look at them and its eyes are closed and it opens its eyes and its eyes dribble out.
Melt out of its skull. Oh. It's alive. It's alive, and it continues to be alive, but it has no eyes in its sockets.
And the thing is, it's weirdly intelligent. Like, it's looking at them. It makes like a chuckling noise at times. Tamara is just kind of out of it. Like, she's conscious, but not very. So Connie Huerta, who was the OBGYN from earlier, she goes to Mosteel and she's like, look, we got to cut this umbilical cord off. And so she ties it off, and the baby's just kind of looking at her, and she ties another part off, and then she takes a scalpel, and then the baby really looks at her, and she cuts it, and Tamara twists and
freaks out
and flails and hits her, and she goes and she smacks her head, and Mo grabs Tamara and holds her down while Jobs cuts the umbilical cord. And the thing is that Connie died. That was a head trauma. She died. And so everyone's like, oh shit, did Tomorrow kill her on purpose or not? Like, what happened there? And we'll see. It's such a horrific. I love the baby.
So there was like this weird concept before they cut the umbilical cord that Tamara was holding the baby, and every time they looked in a direction, they looked together. Everything was synchronized. But when they cut the umbilical cord, it still happens. So
We should also mention, we didn't mention this at any point, but the cast is very diverse for people who like that. Tamara is black, Two-Face is Asian, Most Deal is Hispanic, Yago is mixed race. Like, it's all very, there actually is. So, funny story, later on there's a lesbian character, but Scholastic, which was the publisher, kept cutting the lines where you could you like where it said that, so you can just,
oh really?
yeah, you can kind of, you haven't met her yet, but you can kind of infer that the character is lesbian by the way she
it's
reacts.
not Tammy.
It's Tate, but you haven't really met Tate yet.
I in fact actually didn't know she existed until she spoke up, and I was, there's somebody named Tate in the group.
Yeah, it's kind of one of these things that like comes up later. Basically, they decide like, okay, can we open this ship? Is there going to be air outside? And everyone's like, look, there's no food and water in here. It's all rotted to nothing at this point. We got to go outside and
even
see.
their clothes are in tatters. There's nothing they can really use besides any metal or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think even their skin is like, their calluses have gone. Some of their muscles haven't atrophied, which is slightly odd. But, and so they open the ship and there's air outside. And so they slowly begin to go down and explore. When Mo goes down and sees the bright half of the world, it's almost like it's made up out of brush strokes. Like when he pulls out the grass, there are roots underneath, but the grass itself looks like brush strokes, and the black and white side is almost pixelated. Like they're little brown cubes. And so what Job says is like, it must have been based off of a picture of low res. So that's what you're seeing, is you're actually seeing the pixels in the picture. It's a recreation. And one of the other characters, Violet,
is the Jane that we
right,
spoke
she's
of
basically
earlier.
part of a social clique that wants to move back to a more sophisticated time of genteelness and non-technology. And I actually like how the book doesn't, because there's that thing where like female stuff is kind of bad coded and a lot of stuff is weak and dumb.
But it's actually a strength for her in this novel, which I love.
Yeah, I really did, and I like the way she kind of develops, and like that it's not treated as dumb. And she goes like, "No, that picture, it's a," and then she gives some French artist that I don't.
A Monet, and then the other one's something else I'm not familiar with.
Right, and so they're like, these are recreations of art split right down the middle. Like, who did this? What happened? And the big thing that they realize is that as they're waking people up, is that there's no one really in control. There was no leader. Nobody set up a leader or command structure for this group of people, and so it's a lot of competing personalities. Two-Face and Yago are kind of like shadow trying to get around each other in terms of like who's in charge.
Yago wants to like totally just ossify her because she rejected him.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is that first Two-Face is sort of by default in charge because her and Jobs woke up first. And then once her dad wakes up, one of the other people tells her dad to like not take care of her, but like, go with her somewhere. And she's like, she felt kind of bad that she was no longer in control, but it was okay that her dad was now in charge. That was his role, and she was
He
happy.
should be a dad.
He should be a dad, and she
Yeah.
loved him, and his wife is dead, and she never quite realized how close they were because he's just utterly broken by it. And I really loved this moment because it's such a complex human thing of parenthood and feeling like it's good. The roles we occupy and how we occupy them affect each other. And also with what happens next, it's really nice. And it also, again, Two-Face has sort of a schemingness to her, but it's not evil, really. It's
to survive, but not in a malevolent way like Yago. Yago tries to survive, but also he's
a dick.
He's definitely number one. Two-Face is not number one in her mind always. It is, but then she's able to have these moments of empathy where she's able to prioritize other people over what she wants to do. And because of that, she's made more of a relatable character rather than Yago, who's just honestly a piece of shit.
He really is. What happens is eventually they find that the water, even though it looks like there's a stream going by, and even though it looks like a painting, it's not. It's actual, like there's water underneath. So they drink from that. They go and they stay by the water. They see something in the distance, which are like these weird, like, writer things on hoverboards. And Jobs goes to Violet and he's like, is that in France? Like, what is those a drawing of? And she's like, I have no idea.
Is that in France? No, they're actually aliens that have like two heads and mouths on their neck.
Okay, so they're two-headed, and one of their heads is a bug eye face, and the other is just like a snapping, I thought of it as like an eel, like a big snapping mouth.
Yeah.
And they ride on these hover things, and they're like all insectile, and I love them. One of the things about the aliens in this book is that they actually feel very alien and weird. and not just like Star Trek weird rubber forehead aliens.
And they come up, and they're obviously a kind of tribal warrior society. It's because what they do is they throw out a spear, and they expect one of these other characters that are forgettable to pick it up and fight. And he doesn't do it at first, but then he does touch it. And when he touches it, almost predator style, the other creature then engages with him. And in the end, he ends up slaughtered.
And so this scares everybody. So they go to move camp to the river.
Not yet. Not yet. That's when
Okay, well,
after the worm.
Well, first, no, okay, so first, though, the person who's kind of taking control is Wilson, who is Violet's mother, who like had a small startup that turned into this massive corporation. And so she's kind of trying to lead everybody, but she does it in the business world way where she like appoints heads of departments, and then she's like,
it's so
we have to have a
stupid.
meeting, guys. And I just love it because it's such like a
comfort zone for her that she's obviously reverting to.
It's like a vestigial way of thinking that's so mismatched.
Yeah.
But you can tell like this is the only way she knows how to process the world, and so this is what she's gonna do. And it's really funny. There's a lot of mileage out of that in the first 2 books. After the writers' attack, from the ship comes stumbling Billy's father. And Billy's father had been shot in the leg when they were leaving. And so his leg is hurting him, and they can't quite figure out what's going on.
A lot of the group is saying, nah, like, screw Billy's father. Let him, like, die on his own because he's obviously infected with a parasite because they see a worm come out of a hole in his leg.
He starts screaming just bloody murder. And there's this... At one point, she describes the worm as like moving through his flesh like a dolphin through waves. And I just like,
oh my gosh. So when they realize that there's a parasite in him, there's this like, it literally is described as like they're looking at the wound and a little head peeks up and looks at them.
The very hungry caterpillar.
So disgusting. And so anyway, a lot of the people are like, no way, don't touch him, let him die on his own.
Quarantine.
Yes. And Violet, Mosteel, Jobs, and also Mosteel's mother are all like, no, like we're the last of humanity. We really need to be empathetic and represent the best of humanity. And they go over there, and so they decide they're going to amputate, and they're going to use the scimitar or whatever from the aliens to cut off his leg. And there's the question of, is he infected beyond just his leg and such? But they're still going to give it a try.
Well, and what's going to happen is that they need to close the artery once it's cut. And the only person who knows how to sew is Violet. So she's like, I'm a Jane. I got frilly laces on my sleeves, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to go in there and I'll sew it up. I don't really know how they're doing that because I don't remember a needle and thread, but whatever.
They take the cord out of the steel cord out of the births. It's because everything fabric or,
has just rotted over 500 years.
Yeah, exactly. They're about to do it, and they come down on the scimitar, and they cut off his leg, and immediately worms. A worm jumps out into Violet's finger and burrows in instantly to the point where Mosteel has to amputate her finger immediately. And then Billy's father's screaming and wailing, of course, because of the pain, but also he's like, I can feel them wriggling in me. And it's
awful.
It's so disgusting.
And then, like, I kind of thought of this as like Damien from The Grudge. Like, you suddenly see Billy and there's like this darkness around him and he levitates up over his father. He looks at him and then like there's an energy transfer of some kind and his father just dies. And then Billy just falls down. And like all the group is stunned, but they're like, okay, you 4.
The people who did the amputation.
They're like, you guys need to stay awake because quarantine. But we got to keep moving. We don't know if the writers are going to show up. These worms could keep going at us. We're going to leave the shuttle behind. And there's still like 7 people alive there that are like missing. And that will actually be a plot point that will never be answered, even 14 books later.
Oh my God, are you serious?
Okay, here's the thing with this series. The series is written by Applegate for the first 4 books. Then somebody else ghost writes, I forget his name, Daniel something, writes the other ones. You wouldn't be able to tell unless you look at the history, but a lot of the plot threads don't get answered. Some of the weird questions don't get answered. Some of them do, but some of them don't.
That's a shame.
Actually, do
you know why he took over it?
They had ghost written a lot of books together before. Like it was just, they were like a writing team. One thing I will say is that I really like books 1 to 7. And then after 7, there's a big status quo shift that no one liked. I don't like it, and I don't want to read it.
I want to know what it is so bad.
We're going to do the next 4, right? At some point.
So I got to wait for this.
They walk through the night, and then they see a town in the distance. And basically, GIFs hadn't been invented when this book was written, but essentially it's like a GIF where like the people in it keep going through a motion and then going through the motion again. And it's like this little Italian looking town, I think of it as like a villa. And they're like,
Yes,
what the
yes.
hell is this? And Violet says like, oh, it looks like this painting from whoever, from wherever. And the very famous Tower of Babel painting, I forget from who, is in the background. And that's what's happening. It's a Tower of Babel in a little village in front of it.
And these people, some of them, the thing is, and they mention this, whatever AI or whatever generated this environment doesn't understand human nature, but they can replicate images. So some of these people are literally just banging their heads against walls over and over and over again.
They're like a video game character where there's a shell, but underneath there's actually nothing in the geometry of them. If you take off like a piece of clothing or something, which is really cool because yeah, they're like, so clearly someone wanted us to feel at home, and so they just did not have a good understanding of what we actually wanted. They probably just scanned some pictures from their ship when they helped us land, and now they're trying to make us friendly. And they're like, "Are those the Rider creatures we saw earlier?" And they're like, they don't know yet.
As they're approaching the village, especially Jobs in particular and his group, there's a massive like shift in matter underneath them, and it creates a vacuum that sucks them all in, and they're all in like space, and they almost like get frostbitten to death, and there's no air, and they're suffocating, and they see these blue creatures that are different from the other aliens, and they're outside in the space, and they almost seem hesitant, like they're a little confused as to why the humans are there.
Yeah, I thought of it as like big geysers breaking out of the earth, and then they get sucked in, and then Mo looks and he sees that they're in a ship that's massive. He can't even see to the far end on
Yes.
either side. It's massive and it's alien, and they're like, oh shit, it was a ship this whole time. And the aliens are kind of they're like four-legged. They kind of look like, I always thought of them as looking a little bit like blue donkeys.
Oh, I was thinking of a
A
horse.
horse, and they have
Yeah.
like two tentacles on the side of the face. They're called blue meanies, like the Beatles reference. And so that's what they call them from then on. And they're kind of hesitant, but then they fly into the ship in like these big swarms.
And they even sort of rescue Jobs and Mo Steel in that. They bring them back in. It's because they kind of hold on and they help them in a weird way. And they come back in, and then, of course, they're saved and they're back inside the environment.
And what they find out, though, is the ship keeps trying to block them. They're flying on these jets, but the ship keeps trying to put up like literal barriers to make them run into. And then at a certain point, like it's fighting their incursion. And then at a certain point, they fly off. At this point, the two groups have been separated. So you have Jobs and Mo Steel and his mom and Violent and Billy. And then you have Yago's group with all the adults and Two-Face, and also Jobs' brother Edward, who's like his younger brother.
Who we've not mentioned even remotely
he's,
so
he's
far.
not important until book 3. Book 2 ends with basically the discovery that like, oh shit, they're on a huge ship. What's going on? This second book is interesting because it is so different than the first book. Like this second book,
100%
is like going to be what the rest of the series is like, but it makes you realize because the first book is fairly grounded, like sci-fi, so to speak, and that everything that happens in it is pretty possible. And this book is just like this weird fever dream, and I love it. I love the imagination she comes up with for this environment and these different ideas, and
the fact that she pulled from paintings in the first place, like what a bizarre idea, but also what an amazing idea that an AI would, because you don't know at first that it's an AI,
it's spoiler alert, it's
but
going to be an AI.
read their like data essentially in their ship, and it didn't understand the difference between a human reality, or at least that's what we've been led to believe so far. It doesn't understand the difference between human reality and human expression of imagination.
And so like, and it kind of understands certain things, like that the grass has to have roots, so it just transposes those from like another plant underneath it, and so that's really cool. And so in book 3 we find out more about this ship. That's where we actually figure out like more of what's going on with it. And basically what happens is at this point the two groups are separated, and they're both in the town, and they're both like, okay, why don't we make our way to the Tower of Babel, and that's where like we'll meet up. And that's also where they notice that the blue meanies are trying to get to. And what happens is, I'm probably forgetting parts of this because I just don't remember it super well. Yago's group and Two-Face's group, they start getting attacked by the Riders. Those are the first aliens who ride on the boards. And so they like run them down. They're running through the streets. Eventually they all run into a building, and the Riders are going to come at them. And Tamara just like butchers like 3 of these Riders. She like catches the
she
spear.
like full on matrixes, like moves in midair type of shit.
And she's just contemptuous about it. She laughs at them. She kills one. But what happens is that they realize that now they're trapped in this room with like one of the Riders on the outside, and a bunch of the Riders are going to be coming. They're going to get reinforcements to come in. And so That's where they're in for most of this book. They're trapped in there having to deal with that. And we'll get back to that. And then Jobs and his group, they basically find one of the blue meanies that had been hit, right? And had fallen down and been injured. But they can't really communicate with him. Like his like tentacle side face things goes, and that's how they talk, but they can't understand him at first. He and them both start kind of going towards the tower, and they can't really communicate, but they're both working at the same place. And then what happens is that the village starts to be filled with these absolutely strange things, and we actually see them first from the group from Yago's group, and it's the coolest thing because there's a door that they're gonna go open.
I loved this. And so this is where we start to get Bosch's painting influences, which is, I mean, come on. Thank God, Applegate. Thank God.
If you don't know who Hieronymus Bosch is, by the way, he painted these really weird pictures of like
depressing images of hell and torture, and like, think Picasso.
But like absurd ones, like a dog eating a man and his legs are flailing everywhere and he's still walking, and like just bizarre things.
Like the fish ran away with a spoon type.
But like as a person,
dog,
yeah.
Whatever. They get to the store and Wilson, Violet's mother, thinks to herself, we shouldn't open this door. I'm getting this primal feeling that we shouldn't open this door. But then she says, open it. And they open it, and there's this old woman frying a decapitated head in a frying pan, and a deer standing on its hind legs in a suit, just blankly looking at them.
And then the woman turns and she has like a frog face. And then she just goes back to her soup. And they're like, they close the door and they're like, what the fuck? It's such a cool scene because it's so absurd. And that's what's happening, is that the ship is populating this village with these harmonious, I'm going to keep mispronouncing it. Hieronymus Bosch painting demon creatures that are just like cackling and absurd and weird.
Like, for example, ears that are able to walk because they're speared through together, and they each have like one leg type of thing, I think. Giant ears are walking with a weapon, and they're just like it's ridiculous, and it's Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
Alice in Wonderland, and it's equally as dangerous as Alice in Wonderland.
It's just horrific. And what's hilarious too is that Mo is very his grandmother was very Catholic, and she like really instilled that fear in him. And so like, even though he is usually like gung-ho and cool and doesn't lose his head, like he's like, oh shit, this is hell. This is the hell my mother told, like my grandmother told me about. And like, it's so, I really love it. It's so cool. And so basically what happens with Jobs' group is that these demon Bosch paintings attack, and the blue meanie shoots a flechette gun, which is basically a bunch of small like needles or shards, and just tears one apart.
I love that he's trying to help them.
They run off with him, and eventually what they realize is that through Billy, who they've been carrying, even though he's still catatonic, they can communicate with him. If they touch Billy and then say something, he can understand them, and he has like a
projector screen
on his chest that will light up. And what they figure out is that he is called Four Sacred Streams, and he refers to his people as the children of Mother. And what we find out is that Mother is the spaceship. She is the AI that controls the spaceship.
The mothership, as one would.
And that they are her maintenance crew. That's what they were born to do, is to be the maintenance crew. But they were pushed out for a while.
By the crew members, which I'm assuming are the other aliens?
I don't know. We'll see.
What are the other aliens, William?
I don't know. We'll see. Jobs is like, okay, but why is Mother attacking you guys then? Why is she attacking us? And there's like a pause, and he's like, Mother is in need of maintenance. She's confused. And there's a really hilarious line later on from the Blue Meanie's point of view, where like he's getting attacked by all these demons, and he's like, Mother really needed some maintenance. Like, cause
yeah, I know, isn't it
his
great?
race was bred to be the maintenance of the ship, and so like that's kind of how he thinks about it a little bit. So they're like, okay, what are you trying to do? And he's like, okay, this node has been corrupted. We need to go to the node and reset it. And Jobs, he really understands tech, so he's like, he can latch onto that as like, oh, okay, this is how we're going to fix this problem. And the node is in Tower of Babel they were heading to.
Well, technically, isn't it in the depths of hell?
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, they're going downwards, and that's where they're going.
Yeah, so clarification. These demon creatures that are all sorts of like maniacal faces and such, like fish heads that are walking on like in suits with gentleman feet and such, they're pitchforking them like goading them down the staircase and all the way down into this like hellish landscape where there is, for example, people pulling this like device like in a circle, and it's in a mortar and pestle, and they're mortar and pestling and crushing human bodies.
There's another one where there's a man's guy's butt in the air and there's bird keeps coming out of it. And at one point, Jobs goes to Violet and he's like, "What is this?" And she's like, Ernest Bosch was a weird dude. It's an allegory. I don't even know, guys. I don't think he ever thought this was going to be a real thing 500 years in the future.
But luckily, since she's with them, she's pointed out quite a bit of information. She also keeps quite the level head for the most part. And she's very empathetic and full of humanity because of the arts background. So she's able to connect with Jobs and Mo Steele and stuff. And she actually ends up being kind of like, she's not quite fond of them yet, but they're reliable. And that's the thing with everyone, is that people are choosing friends based on how reliable they are.
That's a perfect segue into Yago's group, where the aliens show up again. And Wilson is like, okay, we got to call a board meeting. I want option people. And Two-Face is like, this is so stupid. And Yago is like, this is stupid, but I'm going to be her main helper.
I'm going to be her henchman, her toady.
Yeah, and he's in the meeting and he's not even paying attention. And he's like, okay, what we need to do, guys, is actually the aliens aren't the problem. We got to think about the freaks among us. Those are the real aliens, because he's just immediately going to divide and conquer. And I'm like, what are you doing? This is the most, like, again, he's sort of an unsubtle character, because he's immediately like, oh, I don't know about Tamara. She's a weird freak, and Two-Face. And also, have you noticed Edward, Job's brother, he's a chameleon now. And yeah,
he's suddenly changing color. Like, they've been noticing slowly, and there is a foreshadow to this in a lot of different places. It's because, for example, Edward goes missing. Edward being Jobs' brother, goes missing often, and Two-Face has been charged with his safety by Jobs, which is why I mentioned the empathy and putting other people over herself, because she puts Edward over herself a couple of times. And he's changing like colors and materials on his skin, and man, I wonder where that's freaking from. Does that ever get explained?
They just refer to it as basically radiation from the ship mutation, which,
fair enough, whatever.
That's not how mutations work, but whatever. Like, mutation is like you grow another pinky and then die of cancer. That's like a real radiation mutation. But anyway, and so he's like, there are freaks and all this. Well, and also I should say that Two-Face realizes what he's doing, and she does not like it. She's like, shit. On Earth, my deformity, the burns, was like a good way of telling who was my friend and who wasn't. It was kind of just a weird thing.
It was a tool.
But here we are devolving. I am the scapegoat. I am the freak.
And it's a weakness.
It is a weakness. And like, I will be cast out. And again, she's very smart about this kind of stuff. But before any of that can really come to fruition, more writers show up. They're like, oh shit, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then basically they have to ask Tamara for help, because like, she actually is the only one of them who can fight. And she's like, okay. She's like weirdly apathetic to them.
She's not able to control herself. We get one small perspective from her where she thinks to herself, I'm not in control of my body, the baby is. And I'm not sure, like, she is not loving per se towards the baby. She's confused and fearful because the baby is able to control her. Period.
It's really cool in the way it's described. So she's like, okay, I'll handle this one for you guys for free. And she goes out and she slaughters like another 4 aliens. And again, it's super cool. She can feel power coursing through her that's being fed to her through the baby bond. That makes her like fast and badass. And also she was a badass to begin with.
And then once she's finished killing them, she comes up, the next one will cost you humans. I love that Wilson specifically is like, what is that? What does she mean, humans?
That was a great line. You're right. Because it's the ending. It's such a wham line. She comes back and she's like, yeah, that'll cost you humans. I forgot that. It's a great line.
Like, that makes you wonder, is the baby not human, or is the baby human and then some? Like, is it inhabited by another like force of some sort that's not human? Or is it actually truly her child that has somehow, like, I don't know, mutated into some like higher being of some sort? And apparently the baby wants some num-nums.
So what she says is like, because they find out more riders are coming, and she goes, okay, to kill these, I'll only need to eat one of you.
I saw that coming a mile away, though, honestly.
It's so fun. And so then the group basically is like, oh, okay, they have to decide one of them to eat, to sacrifice to the baby so they can all survive. And one of the guys quotes Spock from Wrath of Khan. He goes, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. And it's hilarious because he keeps repeating that as the situation grows more fevered and weird. And you're like, the point of that line is not to sacrifice someone else. It's to sacrifice yourself, you weirdo. But it shows such the ugliness of humanity.
Perversion of the better halves of humanity. And so we're skipping a few things, but essentially, who do you think they're going to sacrifice?
Two-Face is smart enough to know it's going to be her, so she goes, okay, you and me, Edward, let's run off, let's go find jobs. And that's stupid because there's a bunch of demon Bosch paintings running around, and at one point they have to run, and Edward gets left behind, and they're going to get him. And then a second later, Two-Face shows up, spears the demon, and then grabs him and runs. And she literally just goes, sorry, I got scared. And he's like, it's okay. And they just keep running. And I love that moment.
It shows strength in her. It's because she was scared. She was overtaken by her fear, but she was able to intelligently overcome that fear to the point where she attacked for Edward's sake. And also Edward's like, I messed my pants. And that happens a couple of times where people actually lose control of their bowels a little bit. And it's just a little bit more gritty, realistic.
It's messy and it's unheroic to lose your bowels.
Not just unheroic, but it's dehumanizing in a weird way. And so even having like, I mean, Edward's a child, but there's also another time, granted he doesn't mess himself, but there's another stuff where Mo Steele is like, I gotta take a shit.
Yeah,
like,
that's really funny.
I'm glad that it addresses that, because sometimes I get into a novel of some sort and I'm like, what if she has her period? Where is her period? And how is she taking care of that? Or how is, like, where are the bathroom breaks in some of these scenes?
Or Naruto.
Naruto. Not Naruto.
I know the old ways. Where it's like they can smell a drop of blood, so you gotta be careful not to be cut in battle. And you're like, how does this work with female ninjas exactly?
Oh, I didn't even remember that detail.
It's in one of the battles, I forget which, but again, I love the way that it's messy and there's like a cabin fever is always what I describe it, and a paranoia to how the humans are just in this messy little clan. And so Two-Face and Edward have to run back, and they're like, okay, more riders are coming. So Wilson goes, okay, we're gonna sacrifice Two-Face. And so Yago,
because that makes sense.
She's the freak. And what's funny is her dad doesn't defend her really. He just kind of like sits there and like says like, no guys, don't do it.
Yeah, no, he doesn't fight for her or anything.
And again, that's what's interesting is like Two-Face loses a lot of respect for her dad. In times of peace, she loved her father, like in the first book, and she felt like okay with him taking on the mantle. But like here in this new world, he's pathetic.
He is pathetic.
He's pathetic, and it's interesting. So they grab Two-Face and start pulling her towards the baby. And Two-Face, like, she's like, oh shit, I can't do anything. So she talks fast to Yago. She's like, look, this is a bad idea what you're doing. They're all in the moment. They need you to do this, but they're going to remember that you sacrificed one person, and they're going to blame you instead of themselves for making this decision. Don't do this. Let's sacrifice Wilson instead. You want to take out the top person, not the bottom person. I'll do it. It won't be on your head. I'll take the blame for it. And this actually kind of works. And so Yago goes to Wilson. He's like, look, if you want to sacrifice her, you got to do it. So Wilson goes to sacrifice Two-Face. Two-Face smacks her in the back of the head. The writers are coming up. And then we cut to Jobs Group.
Well, technically, it ends on the note that the baby took Wilson's ankle and hand firmly and started.
The baby's so creepy. And so in Jobs Group, they've basically just been continuing to move farther. At a certain point, they lose control of what's going on, and the demons grab them all and start like bringing them to their death. Jobs gets balanced on his face on this massive like cleaver thing,
and they slowly bring up the cleaver towards him, so he'll slowly be impaled from the bottom
and just sliced. Violet, I think, gets thrown into a tar pit with a bunch of screaming heads. Mo Steele, they throw him onto a pan, and then he does a weird flip and gets out of it because he knows like acrobatic stuff, and then they're like, all right, fine, and then they hold him down. And what happens is like they're all mobbing the Blue Meanie, and he's continuing to march forward and forward. And he says to Mo, who's the last person, he goes, sing the song of my death to my people. Right. And he reaches the node and he blows himself up. And what that does is it resets the node's environment. So suddenly they all drop and fall into basically what's the Everglades. It's a bunch of like low water and with like islands in between, and it's swampy. And when that moment happens, all of the demons disappear. But also the writers who were going to attack Yago's group, they stop and they just kind of like go away because we find out later what happens. You haven't gotten to that point yet, but basically they thought they had to kill that group to reset the environment to their home environment, which is the swamps. We actually get their viewpoint in the next book, and it's actually kind of cool. And so that's where that book ends. But basically what Jobs realizes is like there is a bridge to this ship, and we need to get to the bridge and figure out what's going on with Mother, and if we can like survive in this environment, because clearly she can make an environment that's comfortable for us, but she's kind of crazy.
This makes you wonder, is this a mothership where different environments are created for different, like, I thought, dying races? What exactly is the goal of this environment ship?
Well, I don't want to spoil too much for you
Don't say anything to me. Don't
because it
say
is
anything to me.
interesting. There are some questions that are answered really well. And again, not all of them, but like a lot of them. But
Like that one?
yeah, that gets answered to what's going on with mother, why she is like this, what she's doing. It gets deeper and weirder. It gets super weird.
The thing that's nice about this book series so far is that it's not afraid to explore the more philosophical aspects of what it means to be beyond humanity and the like the purpose of humanity as we know it on earth. Like, we go to work, we come home, we support our children, but what happens if we don't have children? What if we are the children? What if we are not in a society in which we can actually build things for ourselves? What if we're in such an alien society that we don't even know how to feed ourselves? At what point does it become useless to even engage with the pursuit of life?
One of the people, I forget which, talks about how like they actually died 500 years ago, and at this point they're just ghosts. Humanity is dead. They don't even have enough to form a reasonable gene pool anymore because there's only like 40 of them. And the thing about it is it's something, I think about too, in terms of like there's no continuity. There is nothing before. There is no, at one point later, Jobs introduced himself to another person and they both say where they lived, and it's like that doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
There has been no point in human history where there have been no more humans or people to remember. You could be the most inconsequential person, and your life, even if you don't have kids, even if you don't interact with a lot of people, will affect other people around you. It's a pebble dropped. There's ripples. The ripples grow. They form. They slowly, lose their individuality, but join the river or whatever metaphor we're going through. But that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen if billions of people died.
It's like a depressing version of Guardians of the Galaxy, because, like, if as a more relatable kind of way, it's because, to be taken as a human or any other race out of your environment where there's no other ones other than like maybe a select few, like, how do you adapt to the different lifestyle? Can you adapt to the different lifestyle? Because it's a completely different species. Not only that, but it's from a different, like, everything. Like, even the way you live.
And it's like the social group doesn't, and that's what's so hilarious about Wilson forming like a board and running it like a corporation. This is such a vestigial way of thinking about it. They are human, they are cavemen now, and they revert to those caveman ways of interaction and scapegoating on one side, and then also Jobs and Most Deal and Violet and Two-Face are trying to kind of retain their humanity.
Not pieces of garbage.
They make a point later that all the adults are kind of useless. Like, the young people, more of them survive the hibernation births, but also like they actually, where physical ability actually matters, physical health actually matters a lot in this environment, much more so than it would back home. And so I just love so many of the things the series does. I was wondering when I read it if I was going to like it as much, and I really did. I really liked it.
Well, it was amazing. I would argue that this is, listeners, watchers, I would argue that this might be, obviously, like, Hyperion's kind of its own category. This is the best book we have read in a YA category.
I'm very pleased by
You're
that.
welcome, Will. You're welcome,
I
Will.
like, it's funny because I really wanted you to finish all 3 books so we could talk about them, because like I really wanted your opinion on it in terms of what you thought.
No, but it's everything I like in a narration. So like I was saying before, one of my favorite books as a young person, and I don't want to say nowadays either, because it's more of like when you rewatch Lord of the Rings. I rewatch Lord of the Rings, it's because it's a comfort zone. I reread Tithe because it's a comfort zone. And it doesn't mean it's not good. Lord of the Rings is amazing. Tithe is amazing. But there are other things to discover and to mean more to you as you enter different stages of your life. And Tithe is amazing because it's to the point, but it hits home in a lot of different ways, and so is this. That kind of narration is something I've aspired to my whole life because I think it makes a bigger impact, and it also engages you in a way that doesn't take you away from the action of things, while simultaneously still giving a very beautiful picture of things that's very sensory. And this book did it, and I think I would honestly recommend this book to every single person who watches our podcast.
If you can handle the body horror and the existential despair. But no, I agree. I love the series. I really like how it's written. It's not like strictly realistic at times. Some of the characters are a little broad, but like in a fun way. You know, it keeps it from being completely
It doesn't
depressing.
take you out.
Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't take you out.
I want to read the next 4 with you. So we'll do that at some point. So subscribe. Also, we have a Patreon. You could, read along. We do a Patreon where we have a book club. You get to vote on books and through a poll on which ones we'll read, and then we do a live stream with them. Go check that out if you would like to support the channel. I don't want to read the last 7 books. We can if you really are interested in it, but
maybe we'll see what the big turn is.
Thank you guys for listening. Do you have any last thoughts?
Again, if you want to read this, it's free online. Just Google the PDF of the title and you'll get it.
And you can also, I think it's going to be re-released soon. And I think for like a reasonable amount, I think like the ebooks are going to be like $6 each.
Oh, but support the author. Come on. They're like small and they're going to be cheap.
It's going to be self-published, so the money actually goes to her instead of Scholastic.
Yeah, go support her. My God.
But also, if you don't have money and you're poor, do a Google search. The new covers actually look pretty good. They're like a little less weird. Some of these covers are a little
You mean a little less 90s?
A little less 90s, yeah. Well, we will talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for listening.
Have a great day.